In this video, we will discuss how to implement Mixpanel via our client-side SDKs and the pros and cons of doing so. I will also show example calls to set event and user data from our JavaScript SDK. You can find a list of available client-side SDKs in our documentation. Pros to utilizing client-side SDKs are that they can be simpler to initially set up, requiring less initial dev resources. They offer easier tracking of clickstream data than most other tracking methods, and they simplify the process of tracking users from an anonymous to an identified state. The cons of utilizing a client-side SDK are that ad blockers can affect the ability to track data at times, leading to potential mistrust in your data. This is especially true with our JavaScript SDK, which by default utilizes browser cookies. It can be difficult to keep your metrics consistent when utilizing client-side SDKs across multiple platforms, such as across both a website and a mobile app. And in regards to mobile apps, it can be difficult to fix implementation mistakes quickly, as you must wait for users to update to the most recent app version or wait for the App Store approval when submitting new app versions. You should consider implementing via client-side SDK if you have limited dev resources, no existing data collection infrastructure, or no reliable method to track clickstream data. Client-side SDKs allow you to track data directly from a user's device to Mixpanel servers. If you will be implementing via our web-based JavaScript SDK, we recommend utilizing a proxy server. Since our JavaScript SDK relies on cookies making API calls to an external domain from your website, ad blockers can, at times, block those calls. A proxy server works by proxying the API call to your own domain before then passing the data onto Mixpanel, ensuring that you minimize those API calls being blocked. Please refer to the documentation provided in this section for more assistance with setting up a proxy server. Once you have initialized the SDK in your website or app, you can then begin tracking data. The following will be examples of calls to track event and user data on a website. This site is an internal testing environment Mixpanel uses to train its new employees. On the left-hand side, you can see the underlying code that is used to run the website, and on the right-hand side, you can trigger the actual buttons. Here, we have a sign-up page viewed function, which will trigger when I click this sign-up button. Underneath this, we have a Mixpanel track call, which will track an event when I click this button. Let's see how that works. Now that I've clicked the button, I can navigate to my project, and I can see the event that I triggered from the button click on my website. Now, let's see how to track user profile information. Now, I'm on the account creation screen, and I also have an account created function that will trigger when I fill out this information and click the sign up button. I have also included Mixpanel tracking code to track an event. I'm calling identify to set my internal user ID as the user's ID in Mixpanel, as opposed to the randomly generated device ID that we assign to anonymous users. And I have a people.set call that will set user profile properties on my user profiles. Let's fill this information out and see how a user profile looks in Mixpanel. Now that I've filled out the information, let's click the sign up button. Now my user is created. Let's go back into my Mixpanel project and see if I can find my user's profile. Here is the user I have just created. If I click into their profile, I can see all the different properties that are set across the user's profile. I can also see an activity feed of the events that they have triggered. It is important to note that the identify call in Mixpanel does not create a user profile. The people.set call is a necessary method to set user properties and create a user profile. However, the people.set call also requires an identify call at some point in the same session so that Mixpanel knows which user ID to associate the profile properties to. If there is no identify call in a user session where people.set is called, we store the profile properties locally until that user does hit an identify call. If you have any questions, check out our docs, leave a comment, or join our Slack community. Thanks for watching.